like that. It's rarely complimentary. It's rarely going, yes, right. You know, so you always have that internal thing going on. And often, of course, while you're having a conversation, you're employing this as well. The one that's kind of going, oh, his teeth are much more crooked than I realized while you're having this conversation. So anyway, better than a lot of these things are never voiced, of course. In this film, I tried to use language in 8 different ways. We might be able to see an excerpt of this soon, but I'm going to start by showing you some works that are going to be a little bit all over the place, because my life is a little bit like that. I always brag about how great it is to be a multimedia artist. It's hell. You know, it's really hard because you're in so many different worlds that sometimes it gets quite confusing. So I often like to try to narrow things down, but these worlds kind of, the borders are very, very slippery. So, for example, this work that I'm going to show you started as a piece of music and became a film and then became a sidewalk of light. And so it didn't seem like, each transition didn't seem so odd. You know, it was like, oh, this should really go like that. It began with a piece of music that was a long story. And one of my ambitions is to make long beat-driven stories and just see if I can make the polyrhythmic situation between words and just 2 or 3 pitches and a series of beats work. So I was working on that, and then the story was became a kind of it also had a film element, and eventually that I got more drawn to that, and so it became the sidewalk of film. So 6 projectors are hanging from the ceiling, and this film is projected onto ripped up paper, so it becomes a very textured sort of landscape, and the story kind of rolls along this line, sort of conveyor belt style sometimes, and sometimes making a very, very long line of landscape. And so this was working with narrative in a visual context is always slightly odd and difficult. You know, when you get to, this is for the trusses. When you get to that part of the Biennale when you've seen all of the visual elements, and then you get to the film and video room and see the card on the side of the door that goes, you know, like it's basically 7 hours to look at those things. You're like, it just is too daunting. So I have always tried to, if I was going to do something in longer form, in narrative, in the context of a visual art situation like a museum, I had to figure out a way to show it, because I'm sure as musicians you know that context is often like a really crucial part to where is your work going to be heard, and on what are the circumstances. And so that, for me, has always changed what I'm making. So in the case of making a narrative piece of music or a narrative piece of spoken things, I've tried to figure out a way to give that a place. So one of the ways was to make these little 3-dimensional sculptures that would be talking sculptures. And they were also a way to play the scale. So there, one of these, which is this big, would be in a room about half the size, and so you have to get right down to it and see what the to be able to hear it as well. So this was a way to kind of bring people into the story, and also the stories had to do with scale as well. Then I to tell you a longer story about a work that I did a couple in October at the Park Avenue Armory, and I'm going to tell you this story because it has a sort of arc that's sort of typical of my work. It began as music and ended as music, but it had a very, very long 15-year history in it. So here's how it started. I was invited in the late 90s to do an installation, a sound installation in Krems. And Krems is a small town near Vienna. And this is a 13th century, built as a 13th century church, and became a pilgrim flophouse and then a cultural center, that kind of usage arc. And so the work was supposed to be in this big, very reverberant place, and I was really interested in reverb at the time. You know, a lot of things with sound installation having to do with reverb. And so however, this was almost an uncontrollable place, and I wasn't able to extend myself to, you know, be interested in the inability to control, although that would have been something to try. But so I was striking out on ideas. The curator was going, so what's your sound installation going to be? I was like, so I climbed up the bell tower. I was coming over here. That's little Will, down over there.
Well.
I'll tell you a little bit later. And so at the top of the bell tower, I looked down, and in the middle of this perfect little Austrian town is a maximum security prison. And over there is the guard tower and the guard with machine gunner. So I'm in the bell tower, he's in the guard tower, and I'm jang, bang, bang. Came down the stairs and I said to the curators, we're going to do a work about telepresence, and we're going to build a video studio in the prison, and we're going to take a life-size cast of this person and put it in the absolute church. And we're going to beam the image of this person in prison, sitting still for several months, and wrap it onto his body, which will be on the church. It won't be a real-time thing, I think you call it life. It will be about the function of telepresence in our culture and the attitude towards the body of the church and the prison, so to the body of incarceration and also incarnation, you know, sort of there and not there. And so surprisingly, the curators go, okay. I was like, stop me now. But they said fine. 2 days later, they found a law that had been in place in Austria for 150 years, some Austro-Hungarian empire, for that thing of, it says if you're in prison, you do not own your own image. Image ownership being somewhat of our 21st century issue as well. Who owns your image and how that works in our own culture. But anyway, I was kind of relieved because at that point I was thinking, maybe it's not the smartest idea I've ever had to put a prisoner in the absolute church in a very conservative country like Austria. So I was like, okay, fine. Then, another 2 days later, and their attorney general said, I love your project. You have a special dispensation, note the clerical details, to do this. So, okay. So eventually, did not do this project for various reasons. Then, the Whitney Museum asked me to do a project, and I said, let's do a collaboration between the Sing Sing and the Whitney, two guarded institutions. What do you keep in there? What do you guard? And so we worked on meeting with meditators there, people who spend a lot of time very still, and talked to a lot of boards, got permission to do this. This was about 1999. And at that point, we almost got it, and then it was canceled because too political. So the thing about it is that at that point, the privatization of prisons was becoming a little bit more in the news, and as well as the number of people who are artists who were under their Rockefeller guard. So, you know, possession can be up to life. It's not sales, so possession of drugs. So, yeah. So there was a lot of attention towards that, and also towards outside of New York City, the second biggest industry after insurance in New York State is prisons. So prison state, which a lot of people don't like to focus their lights on. You know, so anyway, that also got canceled. Then there was a curator called Totten, who was at the Whitney, and heard about this project, and he said, in about 5 minutes, I have the cultural institution and the prison lined up. So we did this project in Milan. It was one of the most overproduced works I've ever done. It cost a huge amount of money. We dug up a lot of cables through the city of Milan and ran them from the prison to the Prada Foundation, and built this life-size cast of this prisoner, and did this. Now, the queasiest part of this, of course, is the aspect of exploitation. I don't know if any of you have come up with this problem. You might have, because in collaboration, sometimes you overstep some bounds. You know, it's easy to go and go, who's making this? So whose work is this? Kind of thing. So in this case, when you're working with someone who's a prisoner, it's very, very potentially exploitative. So we spend a lot of time in some prison looking for collaborators. So this prison is a white-collar prison. So the prisoners in there were guys who had basically dismantled the Italian economy. And very, very smart, spoke Greek and Latin, all writing their books and their articles, and they were allowed to have steak knives and their wine collections. Their families could visit them. They were wearing Armani. You know, everything was right except for the shoes, which were slippers. They were never going anywhere ever. So I'm talking to these guys who are this project and beaming these people, whatever, here and there, and telepresence. And because they're lawyers, and because they're very, very skilled in manipulating your attention from here, suddenly shifting it until you're talking to one person, and the person they want you to talk to, because they had decided who the collaborator was going to be, not me. And so I'm talking to this guy, Latino, background of murder. And so I said, Sensei, can we do this together? We do this project together. How do you see this? What do you think of it? What do you make of this? I see this as a virtual escape. And I said, you're my man. So we did this together, and he wrote about it. It was a very intense project having to do with silence, and having to do with absolute stillness. It was a piece called Life, because he was in for life, in which he was there and he was not there. He was there and he was not there. In kind of contrast that I like to work with in a lot of things that I do. So, and he had a kind, it was not what I expected. He's sitting in the corner and did not look like a prisoner, he looked like a judge. You know, it looked like your distant dad, where you're kind of like, Dad, are you there? Or are you not there? You know, he was like, someone was like, because he could see into the prison only enough to align his projection self onto his three-dimensional screen self, let's say. So anyway, I was very happy about that. And the Part1 Armory asked me last couple years ago to do something. I proposed doing 12 prisoners beamed in live, streaming in live from various upstate New York prisons onto these 12 like hot sheep statues that would just be like in 2 rows, very formal rows, also called that. We worked on that for several months, and we almost got that done, except at the last moment, Homeland Security came in and said, you will never in the United States. Didn't seem to be like an upside to that. So I canceled again. So I was a little bit depressed, and most of the projects that I've done, whether it's music or film or sculpture or anything, always go through these stages where, you know, you're in the middle of making something and then the whole thing blows up for some reason. And in that blow up, I try to step right in and be very happy. One of the things that, best things that I learned from Brian Eno, working with him in the studio on several albums, was Brian is really happy when things go wrong. when things just sound like horrible and they're completely awful, he couldn't be happier. Yeah, right. Because your whole structure is falling apart, and you really have to look at what it is then. Why doesn't it work? Why has it just, done that? And I find that those are really the most valuable times in my life, to be able to look at why it didn't work. And then I also, we did a lot of intuitive sort of strategic things with, for example, there was one time in the studio we were working on something, and he said, let me just try a mix, and I'm just gonna just leave the room. I was like, leave the room? I can't leave the room. I don't know if any of you are control freaks. I suspect you are. I have a hard time leaving the room when someone's gonna go, let me just, work on the structure of your music here. So I left the room. I forced myself, pried myself out of the room, and I came back. It was unrecognizable. This piece of music was unrecognizable. A little tiny shaker that was about 7 miles away and parked over at 1 o'clock, 1:15, is suddenly dead center going, and I was like, what is that thing? And the vocal is where the shaker was, and really teensy. It was so brilliant. It was such a great mix. He had taken the only thing that worked in this thing, which was the shaker, and dead center, featured it, made it heroic, really beautiful. So I was like, what a great thing to learn. Most of the things that I've ever accomplished have really come directly out of failure. Just absolutely directly out of failure. So I'm looking forward to that usually, when something is just kind of like, look absolutely awful, because it breaks up my patterns.